She didn't flinch when the cuffs closed around her wrists. No identification, no wallet, just a battered notebook filled with coordinates and notes that meant nothing to the officers. To the local police, she looked like another trespasser who wouldn't answer questions. But as she stood before the judge, her steady calm unsettled the courtroom. No one could guess the truth hidden behind her silence. Then the doors opened. A general entered, metals catching the light. He handed over a sealed file and spoke quietly to the judge. In that instant, everything changed. But before that day in court, her story began somewhere far less dramatic. At the range, she blended in with the regular Slate 30s. Worn boots, faded jacket, hair tucked under a plain cap. She took the farthest lane, setting up her rifle with a quiet efficiency that drew no attention at first. Every movement was precise, wiping down the bench, lining up ammunition, checking her scope with quick, practiced glances. There was nothing flashy, nothing that invited a second look. She looked like someone who'd shot here 100 times before. But the range officers noticed her breathing. 4 count, inhale, steady hold, relaxed, exhale each shot timed with a discipline that went beyond habit. She fired in the stillness between heartbeats, her first rounds striking dead center. She moved on to distant targets that most shooters ignored, making subtle adjustments for win-no gadgets, just a sense for the air that few possessed. At 800 yards, her shots landed with the same precision as those at 100. A man 3 lanes down kept glancing over, uneasy. After a while, he leaned into the range officer, voice low. "That woman at the end, she's hitting steel I can barely spot. And she's not wearing a badge." The officer, a retired Marine, watched her reload without looking, eyes always scanning beyond the sights. She seemed to read not just the targets, but the entire range wind, light, movement, everything. Her rifle set her apart. It wasn't standard issue custom barrel, modified trigger, stock fitted exactly to her frame. The kind of setup you only see with professionals, never hobbyists. The Marine frowned, recognizing the signs of someone who'd spent years perfecting their craft. Someone trained to make every shot count. When she finished, she packed up with the same economy. No range bag, only a slim case, a few extra magazines, and a small notebook. She paused to jot down a line of numbers coordinates, maybe before slipping it away. No wallet, no phone, just the notebook and a blank key card. The absence of anything personal was almost as telling as the rifle itself. The retired Marine called it in. "Shooter on lane 12, no ID, no permits, running hot." 20 minutes later, 2 deputies arrived, cautious but firm. "Ma'am, we need to see some identification," the taller one said. She turned, hands visible, voice steady. "Is there a problem, officer?" There was no edge to her tone, just calm, almost indifferent. "Standard procedure. ID and firearm permit." "I don't have them on me." The deputies exchanged a look, noting the rifle. "Is this your personal weapon?" She didn't answer. Their search turned up nothing but the keycard and notebook. "We're going to need you to come with us," the shorter deputy said. She offered her wrists for the cuffs, silent, no resistance. The deputies hesitated, unsettled by her composure. As they led her out, her eyes moved constantly tree-line, parking lot, the road beyond, not anxious, just assessing. At the station, the booking officer flipped through her notebook. Pages of numbers, symbols, brief phrases in what looked like code. No name, no address, just data. He asked, "Who are you?" She met his gaze and said nothing, her silence lingering as they prepared to transport her downtown. The deputies drove back in silence, the radio low, no sirens. The woman sat in the back seat, hands cuffed, posture upright. She looked out the window, her gaze steady, tracking the landscape power lines, intersections, the way the road curved past the edge of the woods. She didn't fidget or speak. The senior deputy watched her in the mirror, uneasy. Most people in cuffs showed nerves, anger, or fear. She showed nothing, just a focus that felt deliberate. At the station, the routine began. The booking officer asked for her name. She didn't reply. Date of birth. Address each question met with silence. She stepped forward for fingerprinting before he finished the request, hands relaxed. The scanner beeped, then flashed red no match in any database. They tried facial recognition. Again, nothing. The sheriff frowned, quiet, then called the senior deputy over. We're running out of options. She's not in the system. They moved her to an interview room. Plain walls, old table. One chair for her, two for the officers. Detective Wells entered, carrying 2 bottles of water. He set one in front of her, a gesture meant to soften the mood. She didn't touch it. He leaned forward, measured. You're not in any database. Your rifle's custom, not registered. Help me out here. She watched him, expression neutral, as if weighing every word he spoke. She didn't answer. Down the hall, deputies paged through her notebook. They found numbers rows in columns, some arranged like coordinates, others like codes. One page had fragments of words, some in English, others in a language no one recognized. They called the state police, hoping for insight, but got only more questions in return. In the holding cell, she sat on the bench, back against the wall, hands resting on her knees. She wasn't restless or withdrawn. Her eyes moved from the door to the corners, noting the cameras, checking the pattern of guard footsteps in the hall. A rookie officer spotted scars on her knuckles, and closer, a thin curved line on her wrist too precise for an accident. You climb? He asked, gesturing at the scar. She glanced at it, then replied, rock climbing accident. Her voice was even, revealing nothing. They ran her prints through the federal system as a last resort. While the computers processed, the sheriff called the ATF about her rifle. The agent on the line asked for photos. After a short pause, his tone changed. Don't fire that weapon again. Keep everyone clear of it. The warning hung in the air. Hours passed with no answers. The sheriff, frustrated, spoke to the DA. Charge her with unlawful possession and whatever else fits. Maybe that'll get her talking. As paperwork moved through the office, 2 unmarked SUVs pulled into the lot, parking with purpose near the entrance. The deputies noticed, hands tensing at their sides. Inside the cell, the woman stood, calm but alert. She faced the door, as if she knew exactly what would happen next. The cell was 12 by 8 feet, concrete walls painted an indifferent gray. Cameras watched from 2 high corners, their red lights blinking. She entered, and scanned every detail, the sweep of the lenses, the angle of the bench, the points where shadows pooled. She sat with her back to the wall, legs stretched, eyes following the guard's routine. The pattern emerged quickly. Every 37 minutes, the same footsteps, the same pause at the door. At 22 minutes, a rookie officer brought water, lingering just a moment too long. He stared at her wrist, noticing a thin, pale scar curving near the tendon. That scar, he said quietly. She didn't look up. Rock climbing, she replied, voice flat. The officer recognized the mark. He'd seen it on a friend who'd trained for helicopter insertions, hands burned by fast ropes. He said nothing more, but the question hung in the air, unspoken. She remained silent as the hours passed, her posture relaxed but attentive. When the public defender arrived, he set a battered briefcase on the table and flipped through her file. Unlawful possession, refusal to identify, possible terrorism charges, he said, not bothering to hide his frustration. They're serious. You need to give me something, your name, the story behind the rifle. She offered no answer, hands steady on the table. He leaned in, lowering his voice. The ATF flagged your weapon. They're talking about charging you under the Patriot Act. No bail, no trial. They can hold you as long as they want. She met his eyes, her gaze unreadable. The defender shifted back, unsettled by her composure, as if she was waiting for something only she understood. Meanwhile, deputies pored over her notebook. The pages held strings of numbers, some arranged like grid coordinates, others in columns that looked like codes. There were fragments of unfamiliar words, symbols that suggested radio protocols, and a section with dates and 6-digit combinations. The sheriff, a former military police officer, recognized the structure-encrypted comms, the kind he'd seen in the field. His hands shook as he turned the pages. Back in the cell, she stood and stretched, not pacing, just adjusting her position. Her head turned slightly toward the hall as new footsteps approached, heavier than before, deliberate. The rookie officer returned, this time accompanied by the sheriff. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," he said, his tone different, now less suspicion, more caution. She complied, hands at her sides, no cuffs this time. The sheriff's eyes lingered on her palms, noting the calluses and faint scars. "Where'd you serve?" he asked under his breath. She offered no reply, just walked ahead, her stride measured and silent. The public defender hurried after them, voice tense. "Sheriff, what's going on? We haven't even—" The sheriff cut him off, eyes never leaving the woman. Down the corridor, the linoleum gleamed under the fluorescent lights, leading them toward the next uncertain step. The courthouse, built in 1887, stood as a reminder of another arrappolished oak benches, high windows, portraits of past judges watching from the walls. Inside, the tension was immediate. The woman stood at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, wrists cuffed in front, her face calm. Every seat was filled, townspeople whispering about terrorism, federal agents in dark suits gathered at the back, their eyes scanning the room. Homeland Security officers leaned against the wall, jackets open, hands close to holstered weapons. As the judge entered, the room quieted. The public defender asked for a delay, citing lack of information. The district attorney objected, insisting that the case posed a risk to public safety. The judge, unswayed, adjusted her glasses and announced they would proceed. The clerk read the charges: possession of unregistered firearms, refusal to identify, suspicion of terrorism under federal statute. Reporters from Portland scribbled in their notebooks, glancing up each time the woman shifted her stance. She stood motionless, eyes moving over the exits, the bailiffs, the line of federal agents. Her composure never broke. The public defender leaned over, urging her to enter a plea, but she only nodded. Before she could speak, the heavy doors at the rear swung open. Boots hit the floor in measured cadence. A Navy admiral, dress uniform immaculate, walked directly down the aisle. His medals caught the light, ribbons perfectly aligned. 2 aides followed, carrying black briefcases. Veterans in the gallery stood, instinctively straightening. The sheriff rose to his feet, jaw tight. The admiral stopped at the bench and handed the judge a sealed envelope marked with Department of Defense insignia. "Your Honor," he said, voice low but clear. "Classified documentation." The judge's hands shook slightly as she broke the seal. She read the first page, then the next, her expression shifting from irritation to something far more serious. She looked up, meeting the admiral's eyes, and then glanced at the woman in cuffs. There was a silent exchange, recognition perhaps, or understanding. The judge cleared her throat and addressed the court. "All charges are dismissed under national security provisions." The gavel echoed. A ripple of confusion moved through the room, followed by silence. The admiral turned to the defense table and nodded. His aide stepped forward, cutting the cuffs from the woman's wrists with practiced care. He addressed her directly. "Commander." The word hung in the air. The woman straightened, her posture shifting, the mask of civilian anonymity falling away. The admiral handed her a folded navy jacket, gold trim visible at the edges. The district attorney started to object, but the admiral's look silenced him. "This officer has done more for this country than anyone here realizes," the admiral said. "We regret the delay, Commander." She slipped on the jacket, the seal insignia catching the light. Law enforcement officers who had escorted her in now stood at attention as she passed. Reporters lowered their pens, watching her move through the aisle, flanked by the admiral and his aides. One deputy stepped forward, voice uncertain. "Ma'am, your rifle, where did it come from?" She paused, meeting his eyes. "Same place yours did, only mine was issued for a different purpose." Without another word, she walked out, leaving the courtroom in stillness. The judge watched her go, the sealed envelope still on the bench, the weight of what had just happened settling over everyone present. A subtle shift passed through the room as the Admiral's presence settled over the proceedings. The judge, now fully attentive, leafed through the sealed documents, her face tightening with each page. The public defender and district attorney sat frozen, pens hovering above their notes, the usual rhythm of courtroom procedure suspended. The Admiral's voice, calm and direct, broke the silence as he addressed the woman not as a defendant but as Commander. In that instant, the true hierarchy in the room became clear. Veterans in the gallery straightened, instinctively recognizing the title. The officers who had booked her exchanged uncertain glances, the reality of her identity dawning in real time. Commander Hayes's posture changed. The slouch of a detainee fell away, replaced by the unmistakable bearing of someone used to command. The Admiral didn't wait for permission. He nodded to his aide, who quickly cut the cuffs from her wrists. The metallic clatter echoed, a stark reminder of how quickly perceptions could shift. The Admiral's apology was brief and formal, an acknowledgement of the disruption, not an admission of fault. His words carried the weight of operational necessity, the kind of language used when missions take unexpected turns. Hayes pulled on the navy jacket the Admiral handed her. The trident pin and rows of ribbons marked her as someone with a history few in the room could comprehend. The insignia, the patches, these were signals to those who knew what to look for, proof of years spent in places and situations that would never be entered into public record. The officers lining the aisle stood at attention, an unspoken gesture of respect. The sheriff, who had earlier scrutinized her hands for scars, now stepped aside, voice low. She stopped just long enough to assure him he had done nothing wrong, her words measured and even. As she made her way toward the exit, the room remained silent. There was no attempt to explain, no effort to justify the sudden reversal. The Admiral's presence and the judge's ruling spoke for themselves. She paused at the threshold, scanning the faces one last time, her expression unreadable. The arrest affidavit, now irrelevant, slipped from the clerk's desk and landed face down, a small detail lost in the larger shift that had just occurred. Outside, the day was bright and cold. The Admiral and his aides walked with her to the waiting vehicles, no words exchanged. The officers who had once doubted her now watched with a different kind of attention, their questions unasked and unanswered. She turned back for a moment, acknowledging the sheriff's raised hand with a crisp salute before stepping into the black SUV. The door shut quietly, engines idling. Inside, the courthouse returned to its routines, but the sense of something unseen lingered. The clerk retrieved the affidavit, its name field blacked out, the story's details already slipping into the realm of classified memory. Outside, the courthouse crowd pressed in, searching for answers that wouldn't come. The black SUVs waited at the curb, their windows reflecting the confusion on the faces of those left behind. The Admiral guided Commander Hayes to the lead vehicle, his presence drawing a clear line between her world and everyone else's. The sheriff, hat in hand, followed them out, his questions weighted with frustration. "Sir, I need to know what just happened in there," he said, voice low but insistent. The Admiral paused, glancing at Hayes before answering. "Your department did everything by the book. No fault lies with you or your people." He kept his words measured, never offering more than protocol allowed. "That's not what I'm asking," the sheriff replied. "Who is she?" A staff sergeant opened the SUV door. Hayes stepped in, her movements precise, her face unreadable. The Admiral waited until the door closed before continuing. "Active duty. 12 years. Commendations for valor. Her assignment is classified." Reporters clustered near the steps, cameras raised, but the Admiral ignored them. The sheriff pressed again. "She could have said something." "She couldn't," the Admiral said, adjusting his cap. This was operational. Her arrest maintained her cover. We monitored the situation from the moment she was detained. A veteran in a faded Marine's hoodie broke through the crowd, catching Hayes' eye through the glass. He spoke a single word. "Fallujah?" And for a brief moment, recognition passed between them. She nodded once, acknowledging a shared past. He swallowed, voice rough. "Thank you. For the rooftop. For the hesitation." Hayes reached into her jacket and handed him a polished brass casing, its surface worn smooth. No markings, nothing to identify its origin. The Admiral spoke quietly into his earpiece, signaling the convoy to prepare for departure. He turned back to the sheriff. "Your discretion is appreciated. There will be follow-up." The SUVs pulled away, leaving the crowd with more questions than answers. Inside, the courthouse atmosphere shifted from tense to uncertain. Reporters pressed the district attorney for details, but he only shook his head, folding his notes and offering nothing. Detective Wells lingered by the glass doors, watching the convoy disappear down Main Street. His partner handed him the confiscated notebook, now bearing a new message. "Detective check Port Authority logs for May 3rd. Then call this number," a DC area code, written in clean block letters. Outside, the veteran examined the casing, finding a tightly rolled slip of paper and incident digits. No explanation. Back at the station, the sheriff received a terse call from NCIS. Someone would collect the rifle. No specifics given. Later, a text arrived. "Your cooperation is noted. Expect Major Connolly at 800. The sheriff sat in his office, reviewing the arrest photos. Hayes' face revealed nothing, just focus, the same look he'd seen in his daughter when she tackled a difficult problem. Through his window, the courthouse flag snapped in the wind. The day's events left the town unsettled, with the sense that something larger was unfolding just out of sight. 4 days later, the shooting range door opened, marking the start of something new. Frank wiped down the counter, the faint smell of gun oil mixing with the cool air drifting in from the open range. The familiar rhythm of the day was interrupted by the sound of boots on concrete, measured, deliberate. Commander Hayes entered, the same jacket and boots as before, but everything else had shifted. Her hair was cropped short, her movements purposeful. She no longer tried to blend in. The subtle tension she once carried was gone, replaced by a quiet certainty that drew attention without demanding it. Shooters at the other lanes paused, sensing something different. Without a word, she crossed to lane 12. She unpacked her rifle, hands steady and precise, every part of her setup efficient. Frank watched from behind the counter, noting the way she handled the weapon, no hesitation, no wasted motion. The rifle itself was unmistakable. Custom barrel, modified trigger, a stock contoured exactly to her frame. Department codes, not a manufacturer's name, were etched near the serial number. He'd suspected before, but now there was no doubt. Frank approached, careful to keep the conversation low. "You're here for your gear." He unlocked the cabinet, retrieving the case she'd left behind. She nodded once in thanks, checking the rifle with a practiced glance. He gestured to the engravings. "That's not something you find at a gun show." Her answer was quiet. Final. "No, it's not." A group of college students down the line watched her, their laughter fading as she assembled the rifle in seconds. Then, in a move that caught Frank off guard, she removed the scope and set it aside. The sun had dropped low, making the far targets nearly impossible to see. She leveled the rifle, aimed at the 900-yard berm, and fired 3 shots in quick succession. The sound echoed, sharp and controlled. Frank raised his binoculars. The center of the distant target showed 3 clean holes, each touching. He lowered the glass, meeting her eyes. She didn't gloat, just acknowledged the result with a nod. "You always knew, didn't you?" she said, her tone even. Frank hesitated, then admitted he'd called in a favor after her first visit. He'd seen enough to recognize the signs. She slid a plain white card across the counter 10 digits. No name, no agency. "If someone else comes through, someone like me, call that number." Frank picked up the card, weighing its significance. How often does that happen? She zipped her case, answering softly. More than you'd think. At the door, she paused, her voice low. Check your mail next week. New cameras. Better resolution. Then she stepped out, moving with the confidence of someone no longer hiding who she was. The college students stared after her, silent. One finally asked, "Who was that?" Frank pocketed the card, replying, "Someone who never misses." He watched as an unmarked van pulled up. The doors opened, revealing two figures inside, one with a tablet, another adjusting a headset. Hayes climbed in without hesitation. The van disappeared down the road, leaving Frank with the quiet and a new sense of responsibility. He waited until dusk to close up, locking the doors and scanning the tree line out of habit. As he reached his truck, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Appreciate your discretion. Equipment arrives Tuesday." A set of coordinates followed, nothing else. Frank deleted the message, pocketed the card, and started the engine, unaware that elsewhere, another quiet envelope was about to change the course of someone else's day. Detective Wells found the envelope wedged between stacks of paperwork, its lack of return address enough to give him pause. The card inside bore only a terse message. Admiral Wilson requests your presence. 1400. Building 12. Naval Station, Norfolk. Bring this card. The barcode at the bottom was the only signature. He left for Norfolk the next morning, passing through layer after layer of security. The base was all clean lines and silence. At a windowless auditorium, he counted fewer than 40 people, mostly in uniform. A handful of civilians with the kind of posture that said they were used to being armed, even when they weren't. Commander Hayes stood at the front, dressed blues sharp, her expression neutral. The transformation was complete no trace of the woman he'd watched in holding. Admiral Wilson spoke in measured tones, careful to avoid specifics. 11 months undercover, 16 high-value targets eliminated, a port disaster averted by ours. The words preemptive defense hung in the air, heavy with what was left unsaid. When Hayes's training came up Coronado, top of her class, first female operator in a unit few would ever name Wells, noticed the subtle nods from senior officers, the kind reserved for those who understand the cost of that kind of work. After the ceremony, Wells was led to a small briefing room. Hayes sat at the table, reviewing a file. She acknowledged him with a word, nothing more. He asked if she could have told him the truth. She closed the file, her answer simple. "Would you have believed me?" The question lingered, unanswered, as Admiral Wilson entered with 2 captains. The Admiral offered Wells a new role, NCIS liaison to local departments up and down the coast. The salary bump was almost an afterthought. Wells wanted to know why. Hayes answered with specific. She's arrest report had details that most would have missed. Wind direction at the range, scuff marks on her boots, the pristine ejection port on her rifle. The Admiral slid a folder across the table, instructing him to read it and destroy it by Friday. Alone in his hotel room, Wells turned the pages. Silent Harbor was more than a code name. It was a map of threats, faces, and timelines. Surveillance photos showed Hayes had been tracking him before their first meeting. 6 months later, Wells sat in a secure office overlooking the bay, signing NCIS paperwork. His first assignment brought him back to familiar ground, a gun shop near Quantico. A supervisor listed only as CDR Hayes, NSWG. She met him at the scene, now in civilian clothes, handing him a laminated card. Indicators for identifying covert operators in the field. The checklist included the details he'd once found: odd breathing patterns, scars, the way a shooter handled a modified firearm. "Welcome to the gray area," Hayes said, as they walked the perimeter. The lines between military and civilian blurred. Jurisdiction was a formality. A van arrived. Technicians swept the range, and Wells was told to write 3 versions of the report, each destined for a different agency, each redacted in its own way. Hayes asked if his old sheriff had called. "Not yet," Wells replied. She assured him it was only a matter of time. That night, Wells burned his initiation file as instructed. One page resisted the Flamia personnel form with Hayes's photo and a handwritten note. Wells cleared for Phase 2. Silent Harbor reactivation authorized. As the last corner curled and blackened, his phone vibrated with a message. 800 tomorrow. Dock 14. Bring your sidearm. Elsewhere, the world kept moving. The range opened early, and the first shooters drifted in through the morning fog, unaware that the rules had quietly changed. Frank's routine at the range shifted the day he noticed the pattern. Early in the morning, a young woman claimed a lane with the quiet assurance of someone used to watching, not being watched. She called herself a college shooter, assembling her rifle with steady hands and a focus that didn't match her story. Frank's eye for detail born from years of observing, not just supervising, caught the subtle cues, the cadence of her breathing, the way she cleared malfunctions without pause, the scars on her boots. These were not the habits of a hobbyist. He made the call, using the number Commander Hayes had left him. The voice on the other end asked for specifics: her grip, the calluses, her trigger discipline. Frank answered each question, knowing this was more than a routine observation. The reply was brief. Stay on her. Help was on the way. Frank understood his role wasn't just to keep the range safe, but to serve as a node in something larger, a civilian waypoint for those who operated in the shadows. After the young woman left, a man arrived mid-40s, direct, familiar with Frank's name. He moved with the confidence of someone who expected to be recognized. Reviewing the logbook, he confirmed the woman was an assessment candidate. Her skills were obvious, but her cover needed work. Blending in, he explained, was as critical as marksmanship. The military didn't just look for talent in its own ranks. It relied on civilian eyes to spot the outliers, the ones who could move unnoticed until they were needed. A box arrived for Frank days later. Inside were surveillance cameras and a note in Hayes's handwriting. Keep watching, Frank. He installed the cameras without question, understanding that the range had become more than a place for target practice. It was now a waypoint in a network cone, where civilian and military roles blurred, and ordinary spaces became sites of quiet assessment and transition. Morrison returned, offering Frank a card embossed with a Naval Special Warfare insignia and a new contact number. The message was clear. His work had value beyond the range. The military needed observers, places to test and watch, people who could recognize skill when they saw it. Frank accepted, knowing this was a step further into a world that rarely acknowledged its own. The cycle repeated. Another shooter arrived, older, deliberate, carrying a rifle that spoke of another era. Frank didn't hesitate. He handed over the card, knowing the pattern now. The range, once just a civilian facility, became a silent partner in a larger mission. Frank never asked where the footage went or who reviewed the logs. Some nights, he glimpsed figures on the monitors, faces obscured, movements practiced, their presence a reminder that the work never really ended. Commander Hayes's influence lingered, not in ceremony or recognition, but in the quiet persistence of the network she helped shape. The note with the new equipment was brief, but its meaning was clear. The legacy wasn't about medals or headlines. It was about vigilance, about ordinary people who noticed the extraordinary and made space for it to exist. Frank's role changed, but his purpose stayed the same. Keep watching, keep the door open, and trust that sometimes the most important work happens far from any spotlight. As dusk settled and Frank locked up, the range stood ready and remarkable to most, but now a fixture in a hidden network that stretched far beyond the tree line. The next call, the next arrival, could come at any moment, and Frank would be there, watching, as the quiet work continued. The hidden war never made headlines. It played out in the silence between official reports, in the coded messages and unremarkable faces moving through crowded streets. Detective Wells, now wearing an NCIS badge, learned this quickly. His days shifted from routine investigations to the constant tension of classified work tracking threats, managing information that would never be made public, and navigating the uneasy space between federal agencies and local departments. The raid on the waterfront warehouse was a study in precision. SWAT moved in before dawn, acting on intelligence no one traced back to its true source. Wells watched from a distance, listening to the clipped radio traffic as suspects were detained and evidence secured. The team executed their roles perfectly, unaware that every step had been mapped out months earlier by Commander Hayes. The official story credited an anonymous tip. The reality, as always, remained buried. Back at headquarters, Wells sifted through the aftermath. Arrest photos, evidence logs, redacted summaries, each document a fragment of a larger picture known only to a select few. He recognized a symbol on one suspect's arm, a detail Hayes had flagged in her notes during her undercover work. It was a reminder that the threads connecting these cases ran deeper than anyone outside their circle would ever realize. A junior analyst handed Wells a tablet, security footage from a gas station, time-stamped hours before the raid. The license plate matched a vehicle from Hayes' original files. Wells forwarded the footage to a restricted channel. There was no need for explanation. The task force on the other end would know exactly what to do. Driving past the shooting range at dawn, Wells caught a glimpse of Frank opening up for the day. New cameras watched the lot. Another quiet upgrade pushed through by Hayes. Protocols were in place now, coded phrases, secure channels, a system designed to keep the work invisible. The morning news told the public what they needed to hear. Local authorities foil alleged terror plot. There was no mention of the operation's real name or the operators behind it. At his desk, Wells opened an encrypted file labeled Training Module 12. The guidelines inside described how to spot covert personnel breathing patterns under stress, the way clothing was modified for function over style, the subtle cues that separated operators from everyone else. A handwritten note from Hayes read, "They're always around. You're learning to see them." Routine tasks filled the rest of the morning paperwork. Chain of custody forms, reports destined for oversight committees that would never know the full story. Wells signed his name where required, aware that the truth existed only in the gaps between lines. Later, as rain swept across the city, his phone rang once, then again. A voice instructed him to meet at Dock 12 that night. He closed his laptop and watched the encrypted file fade from the screen, its final paragraph describing the seamless transition skilled operators made between cover and action. The city settled into evening. Wells prepared for the next assignment, knowing the network would continue its work long after the headlines faded. At Dock 12, the network revealed itself in layers, never all at once, but in quiet, deliberate steps. The warehouse came alive before sunrise, forklifts moving crates stamped with innocuous labels, workers blending into the background. Wells stood just inside, alert to every detail. Commander Hayes approached, her presence unannounced but expected, carrying the certainty of someone who never needed to explain her role. She handed Wells a folded sheet of paper. 4 names, 3 locations, and a single operational code name, Silent Harbor 2. The list included Detective Rye, a familiar face from earlier interviews, now assigned to maritime threats. The operation's name told him this was no isolated mission. It was a continuation, each phase building on what came before. Hayes spoke quietly, her tone direct. "You'll partner with Rye. The others are already in place." Wells understood the implication. The process that began with Hayes' arrest and his own by the book handling had always been a test. The network valued procedure over instinct, discipline over improvisation. Hayes confirmed it. Most fail by bending rules. You didn't. They moved through the dockyard, past trawlers and silent crews. At a nondescript door, a keypad accepted Wells's badge number assigned before he officially joined. Inside, a small control room displayed live feeds. Frank's range, the courthouse, the college shooter now en route on a Navy transport. Each screen represented a node in the network, a point of contact where civilian and military worlds overlapped. Hayes opened a locker, revealing standard-issue sidearms, a suppressed MP5, and a thermal spotting scope. She handed Wells a cardno number, just the phrase, "Blue Water, Still Horizon. It was both password and signal, a way to identify himself to others in the network, and a reminder that communication here depended on trust and discretion. Wells checked the serial number on the Glock. It matched his service weapon, still logged in official records. The network's reach ran quiet but deep, its methods precise. Hayes outlined the task. Observe, report, never act without orders. The objective was unchanged from phase on a watch for threats, document patterns, and trust the chain of command. The screens flickered with new information. Frank's quiet vigilance at the range, the young woman trading civilian life for something more hidden, Rye preparing to intercept new maritime threats. Civilian assets, military operatives, and those in between each played a part, their contributions woven into a system designed to remain invisible. Hayes glanced at the monitors, then at Wells. You were identified for Phase 2 the day you noted wind drift on my arrest report. The compliment was spare, but it spoke to the network's standards. Selection was never about bravado. It was about attention, discipline, and the ability to operate without recognition. Wells took his gear and stood in the quiet room, the hum of the monitors and the distant sound of waves filling the space. Hayes left him there, her part finished for now, but the work unending. The network persisted, always watching, always ready for those who could see beyond the surface. Some serve where everyone can see them. Others move in silence, their impact felt but rarely named. Service takes many forms. The woman at the range wasn't the first to move through the world unnoticed. Her story shows that real skill often stays quiet, and true dedication rarely seeks the spotlight. Those who operate with remarkable precision, whether in uniform or plain clothes, often pass by without drawing attention, their work hidden in the details most overlook. Some serve in ways we'll never fully recognize. You may cross paths with them in ordinary places, never knowing the extent of their commitment. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments how you've seen unsung heroes in your own community. Some serve in shadows, you just may walk past them every day.